Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts, Thin Coats with me, Phil, the Glacial Geek. Today we are going to be talking about the top tactics that I've noticed here in 8th edition, and kind of going forward how I think that it can influence the way you plan lists and the way that you play lists on the table. And also what to expect when you go into a tournament scene, or if you're just going to pick up games with people at the local store on game night, kind of what to expect, and also what to how to plan for that and how to work with that, and maybe even learn how to do well yourself. Get good, you know, noob. While I'm doing that, I'm going to be painting up my Leman Russ for my Gene Stealer cult. So I'll be doing that. I just wanted to show off a bit. What I did was, when I painted it, I put some tape up on top here. When I primed this, I put some tape up on top here so I wouldn't get in there and mess up when the top turret goes on there. And I also put some sticky tack over the holes for the sponsons there, so that I could more easily make sure it doesn't mess with the fit for the sponson weapons, which, by the way, I discovered that the sponson weapons don't even need magnetizing. They're just friction fit, which is pretty dang amazing to me. So you just go whoop, and suddenly I've got a heavy flamer. You know, same thing with the ones on the sides. So that was pretty fantastic for me to figure out, because I like to use my vehicles as widely as possible, which is why I also on these, I used tape to hide the on the side there, because I actually magnetized all of the turrets on the guns, so you can see that. So what I did was I put some magnets inside there where the pins usually would go, and over here what I did was I cut off the pins on the side here and then drilled a hole into the side there and glued magnets into there. Just being very careful to make sure that they're the right polarity. And boom, I can use all of the different weapon options for my Leman Russ for my cult, which is pretty exciting. So yeah, this is what I'm going to be working on today, and just kind of going over this and talking about the tactics. So what are the general tactics that I've seen here in 8th edition? I think things have changed a bit with 8th edition. I think back in 7th edition, it really was a game of choose the formation that you want to run and just go with that. It'll tell you what to do. I think you also had a lot more spamming in 7th edition than 8th edition, because in 8th edition, if you had a good unit, it was just good. And I think with the benefit of the detachments that you brought them in, they became even better, and that became a way to kind of win games, is by spamming those kind of units. But in 8th edition, I've noticed that a lot of the spammy lists that I've seen usually run into trouble lists, and they have problems that they face. Like for me, for instance, my first tournament I went to, I kind of spammed some Laspreds. I brought 3 Laspreds with Azrael in the center, and it was a pretty beefy gun line that I had going on there. But with that in mind, I was able to win 2 of my 3 games, you know, pretty handily by doing that. But I also ran into an Orc Horde, which is going to be pretty popular now in this edition, and I had trouble handling that and lost that game because I just didn't have the manpower or the amount of shots to throw down board to handle that kind of army. So I don't think spamming is going to be the way of the future just because of the fact that there's so many more viable options in this edition that it's going to be hard to make a spam list that's going to be able to handle everything that your opponent's going to bring. You know, so you can have a list, a spam list that does really well against mechanized, like I did, does really well against big nasties, does really well against elite armies. But the second that it ran into a horde army, it had trouble. And during the game, it ended up being a close loss, but it was difficult for me to even pull out that close loss. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was lucky to get that close loss. It was, or that he was lucky to win. It was that I was lucky to have it be close, because it very, very quickly could have gone overrun, because he did bring some mechanized stuff, like he brought a Morkanaut, and he brought some trucks, and he brought some what are the bigger ones? I can't remember what it is. The battle wagons. Brought some of those, so I was able to handle those with my las cannons pretty easily. But then once he got his boys stuck in, it became an uphill battle for me to be able to work my way out of there. So with that in mind, what are some of the lists that I think are going, some of the tactics that I think are going to go well? Well, I think gun lines are still around. I think they're going to be very popular. There's a lot of options that you can have for throwing a lot of really awesome amounts of DACA down the board. I think that there's the ability to, I think with the amount of multi-wound shots that you can bring and the amount of multi-shot weapons that you can bring, I think it's going to be a very strong option to have the gun line. But there's going to be a new twist on that, where it used to be that you just have your gun line back there and they would just shoot down the board and keep your opponent from ever getting to you. With the more predictability of deep strike and the ability for units to really get in your face, like bikes can move 14 inches. You know, you could pull off, even on a regular setup, you can pull off a first turn assault easily. And with that in mind, you have to realize that you're gonna have people in your face real quick. And if you don't have a way to counter that or protect you from that, then you're gonna end up having trouble with that gun line. So I think you're gonna see gun lines that are going to evolve now to include some kind of protective measure, like like a bubble wrapping, basically, the way they used to talk about it, which is, I guess, it's not new, but I think it's going to become even more effective and popular, having these strong gun lines with a strong bubble wrap. You know, so you're going to see Astra Militarum, bringing some super heavy tanks and a bunch of Lehman Russes, and then you're going to see a whole bubble wrap of guardsmen around him, because if you can increase the distance that they have to deep strike towards you, keep that 9 inches away from you, further and further away from your tanks, you're going to do better and better as you go into it. So with that in mind, I think you're going to see those kind of bubble wraps onto gun lines become very popular, because DACA is still very strong in this edition. They didn't get rid of DACA like people were afraid they were going to do when they talked about making assault better, but what they did was they made assault more viable. So that meant that you could still go in with a almost purely DACA list and do well in a tournament and do well in a game, but you're going to have to be careful about facing off against some of those assault heavy lists, assault heavy situations, and because it's going to be easier for them to get those assaults off on you. And if you're not ready for it, your gun line is going to quickly just collapse. And once your gun line collapses, you're done for. So I think gun lines with bubble wrap is going to be a big thing that you're going to see in this edition. Again, now talking about that, I think assault heavy armies are going to be a pretty big thing in this game. There's a lot of units out there now that are very good at and get a lot of really cool benefits for assault, such as in Genestealer Cult. Genestealers being able to use the Cult Ambush table to come in from reserves. They've got the ability they've got the ability to get right in your face really quick. Genestealers themselves can both move and advance and still charge. So you're looking at an 8-inch move plus a D6 advance plus the 12-inch charge. And with the abilities from Cold Ambush, you're looking at with the 6, they can place anywhere that's more than 9 inches away from your opponent, but then they can move normally. So then you move normally 8 inches, and now you're suddenly 1 inch away from your opponent, you know? Or if you have to place them further away because of them setting up bubble wraps, you can move, advance, and then still charge them that first turn when they come in from Cold Ambush. And if they go in with a Primus, if a Primus takes them in, they get to re-roll that that result on that, and you're looking at the ability to get it. And even if they roll some of the lesser ones, you know, like 4 or 5, they're still going to be close enough to probably pull off that first turn assault, and that's going to be pretty brutal getting in there. So you have things like that. You also have things like Khorne Berserkers getting to attack twice in the fight phase is pretty cool. You got their ability so they can be chosen to fight twice during the same fight phase, and they're brutal in close combat. You know, especially the turn they charge. What you could do is you could choose them on the turn when, you know, because they charged. You get to choose them first, and then once you get to go back and start choosing again, you can choose them first, and all of a sudden you've got that unit, that Khorne Berserker unit, now suddenly got to go and attack you twice before your guys ever got to be chosen once. And they're not going to leave a whole lot behind once that happens. And you're going to be severely hurt if you're not ready for it. And it's a pretty good tactic to use if you're running the Khorne yourself. Yeah, so I think Assault is going to be a huge thing in this edition, not just because it's it's something that you could that is significantly increased since 7th edition, but also because they've specifically went out and made a lot of rules and units in this that can really take advantage of how the fight phase goes, and also the fact that the fight phase is more predictable now. Like if I charge into you with my Terminators, they're going to get to go before you. You know, even though they've got those Power Fists, it's -1 to hit, but I actually get to use them. You know, back in the day, so what, 3 months ago, and when I would run in with Terminators with the Power Fist, you know, they're going last, and I'm hoping that those 2-up saves are going to protect them. I'm hoping that that their 5-up invul is going to protect them, and oftentimes it didn't. So oftentimes I didn't even get to use. I would assault with my Assault Terminators and never actually get to use them. And it's like, well, you know, what's the point of doing this? What's the point of making that into a strategy and taking those units? And the fact was, there wasn't much. That's why I didn't take those units, because it became so difficult to be able to use. But now, because they've got the 2 wounds, they're probably going to survive a lot longer. They also have, they still have the 2-up save. They've still got their invul, but now when they charge, they get to go first. You know, they get to be chosen first. They're not going last, which is a huge boost. I mean, just that pure fact alone means that, you know, Power Fists and units that used to have these big unwieldy weapons suddenly become a better option to take in 8th edition, simply for the fact that they're going to get to go when you want them to go, when you charge with them, because you want to get them in Assault, because those are really awesome, strong weapons. But at the same time, if you're not going to be able to use them, what's the point of taking them? But now that you can use them, and you get to use them when you want to use them, then suddenly they become a good option. And they're still powerful. You know, they're doing D3 wounds. That's huge, you know, especially if you're charging them into like a big vehicle, or you're charging them into a big monster or something like that. You know, they're getting their attacks and they're getting their damage on them. And if you go in with a big enough blob of Terminators, they're going to be able to take down whatever it is that you want them to take down, you know, and that's going to be fun. So yeah, so I think because of that, you're going to see assault heavy armies suddenly have a more viability, because they're more predictable. They're better. They're easier to utilize. They're easier to make work, and they're easier to plan around and getting them in there. And because of that, I think you're going to see that become more and more of an option. I haven't seen many powers that change Overwatch to positive, you know, where you are hitting higher, like back in, you know, with the Lion's Blade. If you ran the Lion's Blade, suddenly Dark Angels were firing Overwatch at full ballistic skill, which made, you know, charging them nigh on it just became a really bad idea. So in the new edition, I haven't seen much of that, and I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of that. That might change once they start coming out with the codexes, but I don't think you're going to see too much of that change, because I think they realize that if you want to have this be a game where you can make Assault a viable option, you need to be it so that they can actually get into Assault. So yeah, I think Thunderwolf Cavalry are going to be brutal. I think that you're going to have like Terminators are back. I think you've got a lot of units that are just really, really good. Like even down to Harlequins with all of their close combat weapons, they're super good. You know, and if you get them into combat, you get them in there, and they're going to be having a lot of attacks, and you're going to take things down. Especially the way Rending works now, or Rending AP works now. It's just minusing from an armor save. So those, even if you're going up against Terminators, if you've got a -1, suddenly they've got a 3-up save. You know what I mean? As opposed to before, where if you had an AP, you know, AP 6 weapon, they didn't give a crap. They had their full save. So now, having that Assault has become more of a viable option. It's become a better idea, and because of that, you're going to see a lot more armies that are going to be geared around it. There were holdouts last edition where people were trying to, you know, make Assault heavy lists, and Thunderwolf Cavalry were a strong contender for still being competitive, even in a meta where Assault was not, you know, was not the vogue. But at the same time, those lists are now way stronger because of their ability to get in faster, be able to hit when they want to hit, and have a bit more control over things. So yeah, I definitely think that you're going to see a lot more Assault. And if you're not ready for that, you're going to have trouble, like I said, with those gun lines without the without some kind of bubble wrap or protection against Assault. And if you want to take it, I think you're going to have a lot easier time and a lot more success than you would have in 7th edition. So what else do we have going on? So another option that I think you're going to see a lot of, and that I think is a really viable option now, is Horde Armies. Back in 7th edition, Horde Armies were very difficult to take because there was a lot more morale tests that you had to make. There were, and a lot of those guys were very low leadership. There was a lot more with the templates the way they were, and with the template weapons and blast weapons the way they were, it became very difficult to run a Horde army, because you would have to sit there with your billion models and measure them all out 2 inches away from each other so that, you know, they weren't just getting blown up turn 1 to some barraging weapons. And it became very, like, time consuming and frustrating to try to even run a Horde army, let alone make them very successful. And along with that, back in 7th edition, a lot of those Horde armies just had a hard time being able to take down a lot of strong models, because, you know, if you had Terminators or you had someone like a cool character with a 2+ save, that 2+ save was going to take a lot to get through all of those wounds if you don't have AP2 weapons, you know, and Hordes aren't notoriously known for having a whole lot of super strong weapons. It's more just weight of numbers trying to take them down, which was possible. Like, if you make someone make enough 2+ saves, they're going to make some. They're going to roll some 1s, or if you're me, you're going to roll all the 1s. But now the way things are, you know, even if you have just an AP, you know, AP -1 or AP, you know, especially if you have AP 2 or 3, suddenly those weapons are really hurting even high armor value targets. You know what I mean? So suddenly, that if you got, you know, AP -3, or if say you've got AP -2, suddenly that 2-up armor save becomes a 4-up armor save. You know, and that's significant difference in survivability at that point. So Horde armies, you know, throwing a bunch of boys with choppas at your opponent, throwing a bunch of Hormagaunts at your opponent, throwing a bunch of guardsmen at your opponent. Nowadays, they can really start to mow you down, especially with the abilities that they have, for a lot of these guys have for avoiding issues with the morale phase. So you've got, you know, war bosses that can just, you know, crump a few gits and and just keep going with that horde. Or you have commissars that that just shoot one guy, as opposed to making you lose a whole horde of them to the morale phase. Or you have like you just have synapse creatures that suddenly turn all those guys into fearless hordes. So you're not going to be hurting from morale like it used to, and you're going to be able to combat that situation until your leaders suddenly get picked off by some snipers, which I'll get to in a second. And you've got the ability now to run with those hordes and really cause trouble, because even if you don't kill them that first turn when you charge into them, suddenly now they've got an option between falling back from combat and not being effective and not being able to do anything, or they can stick in there and try to fight with you, but they're probably going to have a hard time doing so because of the fact of how things work. There's just a lot of guys that they've got to slog their way through, and now there's not a lot of ways to get a whole lot more attacks. Like a lot of my main characters, like Azrael, has 5 attacks, and there's not a lot of ways to get him to get more attacks than that in the fight phase. So suddenly you lock him in combat, it's going to take him a while to slug his way through all of those Griblies until he can finally slice his way out or have someone else come in and try to help him. But then you're becoming a big attention sink, you know what I mean? And a lot of those guys are now stuck having to deal with you even though they don't want to, and you're free to use the rest of your army to go off and do whatever you want to with them, which is awesome. So it opens up a lot more options for you. It opens up a lot more abilities for strategic planning on how you want to move and operate your army. I think it opens up a lot of different ways, and I think those hordes are going to be very difficult for a lot of people to handle. Like I said, my list just couldn't handle a horde of boys coming down the board, just because I just didn't have the amount of deck up, because a boy doesn't care if he gets shot with a las cannon. D6 wounds to him is the same as 1 wound, So as long as he fails that save, he doesn't care, And I think that when it comes down to that, if you're not ready for that, you're going to have trouble. So if you're planning on not running a horde and you're worried about facing hordes, make sure you've got some ability to throw a lot of DACA, you know what I mean? Throwing some flame weapons in there. So you got, the D6 auto hits onto these guys. So you're not leaving it up to chance whether you're going to be taking out some. You've got a whole bunch more hits and much more likely to be able to handle the hordes of little giblies coming your way. And along those same lines, I think that if you're running the hordes, you should probably also have the ability you have to make sure that you target prioritize what you're doing. You know what I mean? Because if you're charging into flamers, understand that they're auto hits. So they're going to be hitting you just as well in the charge phase as they are in the shooting phase. So make sure that you keep an eye on that. You make sure you run them into the units that you think you can do best against, and then look into consolidating into them. You know what I mean? So if they've got a big flamer unit, maybe what you do is the first round you just you charge into the unit next to them and then consolidate into them. Sure, you're not going to be able to attack them and they'll get some free attacks on you, but I guarantee you units that have big flame weapons or units that have flaming weapons would much rather try to shoot you than they would try to punch you in the face. So if you're going to be charging, make sure you target prioritize and find ways of getting into combat in a way that's beneficial for you, that's beneficial for you and doesn't put you at a disadvantage just because you wanted to get into combat. So hordes I think are going to be huge. I think you got to be ready for them, and I think they're a good option if you're thinking about using them to bring them, because of the fact just the way things work now. But just make sure you do it right. Like I said, if you bring a whole horde of boys and you don't have a way to get those mob rules off, the morale phase is really going to hurt you. You know what I mean? I had a friend that I played in a battle, you can see with the Tyranids, that he ran his Tyranids out of synapse range, his little Griblies out of synapse range. So as I started to take him out, they've got leadership 5 or 6 or something like that, and suddenly he's taking more than that, in losses in that first, in a turn. So suddenly the morale phase comes up, and it's like he's losing D6 roll or D6 plus 1 roll worth of worth of models more, and that becomes hard to handle. You know what I mean? That becomes a very difficult thing to deal with, and you got to be ready for it. But so you just have to do it smarter. You know what I mean? Make sure you've got those synapse creatures. Make sure you've got those commissars. Make sure you've got those the orc characters that can give you the mob rule, or bosses, war bosses and whatnots, so that you're not losing your entire horde to you're not losing your entire horde to morale phase, because that would be pretty rough to happen, and it can happen if you're not careful, if you don't play it right. What else? I think that you're also going to be seeing a lot of buff-heavy lists. I think you're going to see a lot of character-driven buff-heavy lists, so that it becomes time for them to, so you've got Gilliman inside the line of shooty units, because he's giving those rerolls. Same thing with Azrael. He lets you reroll. Any Dark Angel unit gets to reroll failed hits, and that's huge especially for shooty armies, for gun lines and stuff like that. If they can start getting those rerolls, so now you're hoping that they miss, but suddenly they get 2 chances to not miss. And they become really strong. And I think that's a really powerful way. So if you've got a combination of so for instance, for me, if I have a combination of my Primaris lieutenants next to Azrael, next to my shooty units, suddenly they are rerolling hits because of Azrael, and rerolling wounds of 1 to wound rolls of 1 because of the lieutenant. So if I've got them sitting next to my Laspreds, most of the time I'm rerolling all my hits, and then I'm wounding on 2s and rerolling 1s, and it becomes super brutal. It becomes super brutal, and they become very effective at taking out, especially elite units. They become very effective at wounding vehicles, just because you've got those extra little bonuses that let you reroll dice. Because rerolls in this game, I think, are going to become pretty huge. I think the ability to reroll things is going to make or break a lot of lists, make or break a lot of armies. So those character buffs are going to be huge, and I think you need to look in your armies and find out which ones are going to give you the best buffs, and maybe think about forming a list around them. You know what I mean? I've kind of done that with Azrael. He's become like my go-to HQ now, especially for competitive lists, because of his ability to provide such awesome bonuses. So he gives that 4+ invul save. He's given the reroll to hits. He's a beast, and and he's also a beast in combat himself. But he's more beastly because of his ability to grant those kind of rerolls and grant those buffs to the other units around him. It becomes easier to form kind of I guess what used to be the Death Stars, because now it's all auras. But what used to be the Death Stars are I think going to be a powerful option in 8th edition. But along those lines, thinking about the fact that there's going to be a lot of people bringing some pretty powerful characters, giving some pretty powerful buffs, you should be ready to handle them. And how are you going to be ready to handle them is with sniper weapons. So if you're Necrons, bring some death marks. If you're a Marine player or an Imperium player, bring a Vindicator maybe. Or if you're a Marine player and you want to bring Scout Snipers, are pretty awesome. I mean, hitting on 3s, strength 4, the strength 4, and which is going to be wounding most characters on on 4s or 3s or 4s, and giving mortal wounds on rolls of 6. That's awesome. Mortal wounds against characters is huge, because that's one of the few things that they're not going to be able to they're going to have a harder time dealing with. A lot of them can still slough it off. They've got the lost wound thing, and there's warlord traits that allow you to ignore wounds on 6s, but it's harder to ignore a mortal wound than it is to ignore a lot of the other regular wounds. So if you can start throwing mortal wounds onto characters from a distance, you're really going to start upsetting their tactics. So if you come up against an army that relies a lot on those character buffs, concentrate on those characters, take them down, so that the rest of the army doesn't operate the way your opponent wants it to operate. Because if it's not operating the way your opponent wants it to operate, they're instantly at a disadvantage from their game plan, and that gives you an advantage in the game. So I highly recommend rolling with some pretty strong and really cool sniper weapons. So like I said, death marks, sniper scouts. Sniper scouts are, you know, they're not cheap, but they're pretty effective. You know what I mean? And they count as troops. They've got the ability to infiltrate. You know, and I think you can get them in places where they're going to be very effective at picking out your opponent's characters. And not just because of you're looking for, you know, first blood, but because of the fact that they've got all these characters that are giving all these buffs and bonuses. You know, if you can take out an apothecary, suddenly now his other characters aren't getting healed instantly. You know what I mean? If you can take out his banner bearer, suddenly now they're not getting rerolls, they're not getting pluses to attacks. Whatever it is that that banner was giving, you're handling it. You know what I mean? They have champions that are coming up your way. If you can shoot them with a sniper before they can get into combat, that champion is not going to make his points back. So yeah, make sure that you've got something in your list that's ready to handle those. So maybe even if you don't want to go with snipers, maybe just go with you know, a very strong assaulty unit that can deep strike. You know what I mean? Or that can just rise from the shadows. I like having Eversor Assassins are really good with this because they can charge 3d6 after dropping down, so it becomes a huge threat range at that point that you can try to charge into your characters, into their warlords turn 1. You know what I mean? And if you can pop out some of those auras turn 1, suddenly they're going to have a lot harder time handling you because their list is probably cycled around those kind of characters, those kind of auras. You know, and I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's like just do it. What I'm saying is that you need to try to keep that in mind, that if these lists, if you're going to run up against these lists, that's how you handle them. You know what I mean? You don't handle, you know, and this is something that's taken me a bit too, like with Tau. The way you handle taking down their big suits is by shooting all their drones first, because otherwise they're just going to slough off those hits onto those drones, and you know you're going to have to you're going to have a hard time getting at them. Whereas if you just take out the drones, suddenly they're a lot more manageable, because you know, that's one of their big defenses, is the fact that they can slough things off onto their drones. So if you can suddenly take out those drones first, now you're gonna have an easier time. Which kind of segues me a bit into my next idea, which is this edition, I think more so even than 7th edition, is going to deal with a lot more on target priority. You're going to have to want to know what units to take out and when. And sometimes it's not always going to be the biggest, scariest unit, like I said. Target priority is going to be huge. So if you're playing a lot of, if you're playing an objective game, so say you're playing a Maelstrom game, or you're playing, you know, any of the ones that have to hold objectives, and your opponent has this giant super heavy and a whole bunch, and a few little other smaller units to support it, maybe instead of just trying to throw all your deck at that big super heavy because he's super scary and he's, you know, killing a lot of your guys, maybe what you do is you take the priority and shoot down all of his little guys that are meant to go grab the objectives, and suddenly he's got one tank that, yeah, it's killing you, but he's not able to go grab those objectives. And as long as you don't get tabled, you know, you're going to win. You know, as long as you don't get tabled, I guess that's I guess that's a big if at that point. But you're gonna have a much easier time taking out those little guys and playing strategically at that point than you would have otherwise. You know, and I think that knowing what units are a threat at what time and how is going to help you. So if you see buff giving characters, maybe instead of going after the things that are shooting at you, you go against those buff characters, and suddenly those things that were shooting you become a lot easier to handle, a lot easier to manage, a lot easier to kind of take out. So yeah, make sure that you've got strong tactics. Make sure you've got those strong things. And nowadays, I think it's 8th edition more so than 7th edition. It's going to come down to the better tactician, the better general is going to be the one who wins, not just the one who brings a certain list. You know what I mean? I think there's certain lists that pair up better than others. But back in 7th edition, it became a lot of, you know, oh, what formation did you bring? All right, well, good game. That you know, I can't really handle that the fact that you've got, you know, 500 points worth of free tanks now running at me on the table, or, you know, oh, cool. Well, now you've got how much, you know, 900 points worth of free equipment upgrades on your guys there. That's cool. Or, you know, you've got, you know, oh, that's cool. You're going to just null deploy on me and drop in first turn and just slaughter me. There's nothing I can do about that. Cool. Yeah, so in 7th edition, I think you saw a lot more games decided by list construction. I think this edition is going to be less so. I think you're going to still need to give yourself a fighting chance with list construction, but it's not just going to be like instant takes. There's not going to be any more. You're not going to see. You're not going to see situations where, you know, where you just instantly lose once the game starts, because even like I said, even against that horde list, the horde list, which is a strong counter to what I was running, I didn't almost win. I just didn't lose very hard. I lost by 1 point. So I guess I kind of sort of almost win, but it was an uphill battle the whole time because of the matchup. But like I said, it was close. You know, losing by 1 point is you know, is a real close game, no matter how you shake it. So I think you're going to see a lot more of those kind of games. I think you're going to see things be closer. I think a lot more things are viable. And because a lot more things are viable, it makes planning lists a little bit more difficult. Like I said, you have to remember that it's like back in 7th edition, you didn't see a whole lot of horde armies. So being able to handle hordes wasn't as much of a priority for a lot of people. You know, I don't know, maybe your meta was strong with the horde. But around me, it wasn't, and I saw a lot of around the country. It didn't seem like there was a huge amount of horde armies. There were some people that brought them, and yeah, they kind of did well because of the novelty of it, but they didn't do consistently well because of the way those perform in this game. So because of that, I think now that hordes are back, you're going to have to prepare for them. You're going to have to be able to handle them on the table. And you're going to have to be able to handle them during a tournament. And if you're not able to, then you're going to be at a severe disadvantage, and you're going to have trouble winning games. You're going to have trouble performing consistently in tournaments. So you have to make a list that's able to confront those. You also have to have a list that's able to confront a lot of vehicles, because the fact is, I think vehicles got a bump in this edition with the number of wounds that they've got and the toughness that they've got and the saves that they've got. I think you're going to see a lot more vehicles simply because of how I feel like they're performing in this edition. So if you have a list that can't handle vehicles, you're going to be in trouble. Yeah, everything can hurt everything, but you're going to have a real hard time taking down a Land Raider if all you have is lasgun conscripts. You know, you can lock him into combat, but odds are that Land Raider is not the only thing he has, and I'm sure he can bring in some support units to help drag him out of that combat. You know what I mean? And once you're in combat, it becomes a lot easier for them to start getting in with your getting into fights with your commissars, because suddenly they're locked in combat and they're no longer taking aggro from your commissar because they're in combat. They're no longer a viable unit. Therefore, they don't stop other units from shooting your commissar that's sitting right behind them, not in combat. Or if your commissar goes into combat, suddenly now he can be targeted for attack with the enemy's units. So you have to keep that all in mind. Like I had a game that I played recently where I wanted to charge into one of his units with my a bunch of Deathwing Knights, and it would have been a long charge, but it was possible. But I realized that if I tried for it, I was going to leave Belial out by himself, and he was just going to get shot to shit because of that. And you know, as so, I just didn't make the charge because I couldn't risk leaving my my HQ out on his lonesome like that. It just was going to be completely counterproductive for me to even try that. So these are a lot of little tactical things that I think you're going to have to keep in mind now, especially since characters, that's another thing, I guess I'll go into that. With characters, it's going to change the way you kind of view tactics a bit, because they're no longer part of a unit. So if you charge and you block your character from being able to get into combat, because they're a separate unit, so they're going to have to get within 1 inch of the model. They don't have to get within 1 inch. They can't just get within 1 inch of one of your other models. So if you bubble wrap, you know, if you end up going in with a group of conscripts and you bubble wrap the enemy that you just charged, you're leaving no room for your commissar to run in and find safety in that combat. You know, he's going to be stuck there. And he's going to be out in the open, and he's going to get shot the next turn, so that your morale phase is going to hurt even more. And with that in mind, you need to be able to think about that. So you when you do your charge, don't just bubble wrap. Understand that, yeah, maybe I won't have you know, as many guardsmen in combat as I wanted to, but by leaving that little bit of a gap there, I made it so that my commissar can actually get into combat and not get shot up in the next shooting phase. He can actually be there and you know, continue to help buff you know, my conscript squad, to buff my conscript squad during the morale phase, which becomes super important when you've got those big hordes of guys, because it becomes real easy if you don't have something like a commissar, like I said, to help you. If you lose 10 guardsmen, they're going to be losing more in the morale phase. That's just the reality of what's going to happen. You know what I mean? And I think, like I said, there's ways to counter it, which is why I don't think people are as afraid of the morale phase as they initially were when they were talking about the changes that were coming in 8th. But I think that if you're not ready for it, if you don't play it right, it can come and bite you in the butt. And if you've got an opponent that knows what they're doing, they know how to do target prioritization, they're going to be able to hurt you in ways that you kind of never even expected. Unless you are expecting it, in which case you're probably not going to get hurt because you'll be able to counter it before it even comes. So those are just some of my ideas and thoughts on this new edition with the tactics that I've seen coming about. I'm sure there's a million other tactics. I think flyers are going to be a pretty strong thing in this edition, because just because I think vehicles got a bonus, and then the fact that you've got these things that are super fast and can shoot across the board, and the fact that they've got, you know, the 360 shooting arcs now, just makes them a lot more viable, makes them a lot better, because you can't fly off the table with them anymore, but at the same time, you don't have to try to position them so that they're all facing what you want to shoot. They can shoot, you know, whatever it is that you want them to shoot, which is a pretty good bonus, you know, a pretty good boom to flyers, and I think that's going to be very helpful going forward. I think you're going to see people bringing flyers because of that. But yeah, those are just some of my ideas. Let me know what you guys think is going to be the biggest meta changes here in 8th edition. What do you think? What tactics you think have been working for you? What tactics have been working against you? And let me know kind of down in the comments what you how you think you see 8th edition panning out tactics wise, and what armies you think are going to work for it. I'm kind of excited for it all. I think there's going to be a whole lot more different things, because honestly, I think every single thing is viable in this edition. You know, I don't think that every list is necessarily going to be viable, but every unit, I think every tactic, there's a way to make it work. I think there's a way to make it effective on the table. I think there's a way to make it so that you're not just going to instantly lose the second you run up onto the second you place it on the table. But with that in mind, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of planning and strategic thinking when you're building your list, and then how you're playing your list, to be able to handle all of the other lists that are going to be coming your way. And because of that mass amount of viability, there's going to be a lot more. There's going to be a lot more. What's the word I'm looking for? There's going to be a wider variety of opponents and different factions and different forces that you're going to face. Because if you're facing 2 different orc armies, you're probably going to face 2 completely different. They're not just one. There's not just one viable way to run them. You know, same with guard. You can run up against conscript hordes, or you can run up against 3 bane blades. You know, three storm blades. You know, you might be able to, if you play against a marine player, you might fly up against a whole bunch of flyers. You also might run up against like a whole horde of power armored space marines just running at you with bolters, which is, I think, going to be a possible viable option, because that's a lot of bodies that you have to try to take down with 3+ armor on them, and they're hard to take out in the morale phase. You know, with their sergeant there. They're morale 8s. So they've got to lose 3 models before they're fearing anything from the morale phase, and they get to re-roll that. So even if they lose 3, they have to roll a 6 to lose anybody. If they roll 2 6s because of the re-rolling. So I think you can see that. I think you can see a lot of tanks out there. I think las cannons are going to be very strong. I love las cannons because of what they can do. Anything that lets me not have to roll real high to get them, I will take that option. You're going to see a lot of characters out there, and you might see a lot of just very select characters because of the way they work. So yeah, just keep those all in mind. I think it's a very it's a very different game, and I think you're going to see a lot of things out there that if you're not ready for them, it's going to be an uphill battle for you. So just prepare for them all. And I think in the end, the best list that you're going to see are the ones that can handle anyone who comes their way. You know what I mean? The all-comers list. The way they talked about it in 7th edition was I make an all-comers list. Well, I think those are probably going to be some of the strongest ones at tournaments, because you can't plan on facing any one threat anymore. You can't plan on just hoping that you don't face a horde, because there's a bunch of armies that run hordes really well. You can't face it and say, well, I hope I'm only facing hordes. I hope I'm not facing really strong, really strong tanks or really strong monsters, because there's a lot of armies that run those really well. You can't run a list and say, well, I'm just going to hope that I don't get shot up too much. You're going to get shot up a lot. There's a lot of really good gunline armies, and there's a lot of really good assault armies. So you can't just, discount assault anymore the way you could in 7th edition, honestly, somewhat. So with all of that in mind, I think it's a wider variety of opponents that you're going to face, and your list needs to be able to handle them all, or you're going to have a lot of trouble and you're going to be hurting. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. I hope it gave you some idea of what you've got looking forward to facing out there in 8th edition. I hope it made you, maybe it gave you some ideas for a list. Let me know what you think down below about what you think you're going to run with your army in 8th edition, how it's changed since 8th edition, how it's made different things that you want to do, or maybe you've had some new cool ideas that you want to try to run. Let me know down in the comments below. We can have a conversation about how we think the meta and the way the game has really changed in 8th edition. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed it. I've gotten a pretty good jump on getting this first coat on here. I'm using a layer paint. I wish I was using a base paint. So I'm going to have to go over another coat on a bunch of these things, but it's coming out pretty good. I think it's going to be good. The whole idea for these is that they're this is for my Gene Stealer cult, but I'm not painting the same color as like my rock grinders, because I wanted these to be kind of the guard unit that they went in and infiltrated and took out, which is the way that the narrative goes with it. But I wanted to show that a little bit with the way I painted it. So I think when I paint some of the other my other guard, the neophyte hybrids, the ones that are dressed like guard as opposed to the miners, I'm probably going to paint them up with this kind of color. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did, and I hope you guys continue the conversation down below and let me know what you think. And yeah, keep it going. I really appreciate all the people who have been sharing the videos and sharing things. It just recently broke 5,000 subscribers, which is mind blowing, and then broke 5,200. So it's we're building pretty fast, and I'm very excited about that. I'm really excited about all this, and I think there's going to be some big growth, I think, with this channel going forward, and some good changes, not bad changes, in the near future. So yeah, let me know what you think down below, and keep the conversation going. So I really appreciate it. I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek, as always, and until next time, have fun.